fellow booktubers, my name is Lauren, you're watching Dreams, Books, Courage, and today is Top 5 Wednesday, this one being about required reading. Of course, we've all had those books in English classes especially that we are forced to read even if it's against our will. But personally, I've always loved required reading, and so there are just so many books that I could choose from that I've just loved so much. And personally, I really enjoy required reading because not only do you get to read a book, but you get to read it with the entire class, and so you can have a lot of interesting discussions. And you can just learn so much more behind the book that you're reading, and maybe you have to do papers on it and stuff like that, and I've always really loved doing those because then you can just really analyze and dissect different stories. And this is all just like super nerdy, but I love it so much. So let's go ahead and get into my top 5. In the top 5 spot, we have The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, and I vividly remember whenever I had to read this book in 10th grade, and we also had to do a research paper on it, and research is not fun for me, but it was actually quite interesting to learn all the symbolism and stuff that's behind such a simplistic story. This one is just so interesting, and it's short, but it's just filled with so many different things, and there are just so many ways to look at this simple story. I know a lot of people don't like this book, but I personally really enjoy it. I just really enjoy thinking about the symbolism and the metaphorical resonance that this book holds. This book is really where my love of English started, and so although it is not my favorite required reading book, it has definitely changed my life in a lot of ways, and for that I am very thankful for this book. In the 4th place spot, we have How to Read Literature Like a Professor by Thomas C. Foster. And although this is a non-fiction work, it has a lot of different fictional works within it. Within each chapter, it kind of talks about a different facet of symbolism. And so it has definitely taught me a lot about how different symbols kind of play into stories. I really loved reading this, and it is such a nerdy thing to read, but if you love English and you love symbolism, definitely pick this one up. It's very well written, and it also introduces you to a lot of other fictional works, and so while reading this book, I definitely added a lot of books to my to-read shelf on Goodreads. This just taught me a lot about different forms of symbolism, and after reading this book, you really can't look at literature in the same way again, so I would definitely recommend this book for all of you English nerds out there. In the 3rd place spot is a book that I'm sure a lot of you had for required reading, and that book is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I really love Fitzgerald's writing style because he just writes such beautiful sentences, and so I definitely had to put this book on the list because of that, and also because of all the symbolism within it. I mean, even if you just look at this book cover, there's a lot of symbolism within it. Although this isn't like the best book ever, and there are definitely a lot of dislikable characters in this book, there are just so many elements about it that I really just fell in love with. And this is my favorite time period and my favorite place, 1920s New York City, and so I definitely loved it on that account and just the story and everything. I just really fell in love with this book while I was reading it. In the 2nd place spot, we have 1984 by George Orwell, and this book is absolutely fantastic, not just on the level of classics, but also it is just such an entertaining read. If you've ever liked any dystopian, this is definitely one of the front runners to the genre. And so many dystopians nowadays, especially in young adult literature, are not very well thought out, and they don't really explain how they came to be. So if you've ever really wanted to know how a dystopian is built and how it works, I would definitely recommend that you read this book. It is just so good, and there are a lot of pop culture references within it, especially like Big Brother is watching you. There are a lot of like creepy and weird things in this book, but it's amazing, and I would highly recommend this book just because it is so good. And it really just makes you think about this world and everything within it. There are just so many facets of this book, and I definitely recommend that you give it a try. In the 1st place spot is an even earlier dystopia, and that is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This book is just so weird, but also just so good. Again, this is a very well thought out dystopia. And this book really had me questioning whether or not it wasn't just a utopia, because this world is just so perfectly engineered, and it's just a completely different look on how a utopian / dystopian world can be ran, because this dystopia is ran on man's innermost thoughts and desires. I don't really want to say too much about this book because it is just so much better going into it and not knowing what to expect, but trust me, this book is super weird, but again, it makes you think about all of these things in such a different way. I still think about this book and a lot of the things within it because it is just such a realistic portrayal of what our world could become. So this is definitely a book that I'd recommend you pick up if you're like 17 or older. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I would love to know what your favorite book that you had to read before a class was down below. And now I'm gonna go get back to reading.